Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors Advanced Self-Publishing Salon with me, Joanna Penn, and Orna Ross. Hi, Orna.
Hi, Joanna, and hello, everyone. Welcome again.
Welcome again. Here we are. And I can't believe how fast the year is going. It's just crazy. So today we are talking about taking your non-fiction books to the next level. Because, of course, Orna and I both write fiction, but we also write non-fiction. So we're going to get into that as our topic today. But before we get into that, we are just going to do our updates as ever. We are authors as well as talking about writing. So we always like to give you an update. And the first update, obviously, is about the Alliance of Independent Authors. So, Orna, as we speak on, Monday, the 2nd of March, 2020, very important to date stamp this at 7 p.m. UK time. What is happening with the Alliance this month?
Well, what should be happening is the London Book Fair, which, as anybody who kind of knows us knows, is a highlight of the year for us. Ally launched at the London Book Fair back in 2012. You were there.
I was.
Yes, and lots of our still existing members were there. And every year we celebrate our birthday there, and we do all sorts of education and thing. And London is one of the best publishing fairs for authors. They have a great author HQ and so on. But of course, coronavirus has struck and is here now in the UK, as so many places. And while London Book Fair has said that it is going ahead, obviously we've got a lot of thinking to do ourselves, and I'm sure they are thinking too about, do we go ahead? What is the responsible thing to do? Cramming 9,000 people into a room,
with no ventilation.
With no ventilation, as we were saying earlier on. Everyone always gets sick at London anyway. Everyone ends up coughs and colds and things after London Book Fair, and a city of 9 million, all of those things that everybody is thinking about. So right now we don't know what's going to happen with the actual live fair. We do know that SelfPubCon, the Self-Publishing Advice Conference, which Ally runs in the wake of the fair, bringing some of the sessions there. We record some live sessions there and broadcast them in the conference, and we run 24 sessions over 24 hours. We do this twice a year, and that will go ahead. Thank heavens for virtual. Let's hope the internet doesn't catch cold. But yeah, so SelfPubCon will definitely go ahead. If London does find, if London Book Fair does find that it has to cancel, and we're all awaiting the word from the UK government tomorrow, actually, if they find that they do have to cancel, then we'll try and see if we can do some of those planned sessions virtually, so that the programme is not affected. So we'll do our best. We'll carry on, and life happens, doesn't it? Every so often.
Yes, life does happen. And we were also talking about this because, of course, we understand that a lot of people are, there's anxiety with things that are out of our control, and that happens in life in general. And we're writers. So one of the great ways to deal with stress and anxiety is to write about it. So I'm not someone who, I'm a thriller writer, and I read a lot of pandemic thrillers. So I am quite hypervigilant at the moment, and I think a lot of people are. So I'm dealing with this kind of by writing about stuff in my journal, but also, I'm writing a novel, so I might as well put stuff in there. So use it, people. I mean, you might as well, and just carry on, basically. So that's all we're going to say on that topic for now. So let's get on with our personal updates. Orna, what have you been up to?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that we planned this non-fiction session without realising, I think, that both of us were actually going to have a non-fiction book going up. You're a little bit ahead of me. Mine actually loads at the end of this week. It's just coming back from back from the proofreader now to just do the checks, and so that is the long-awaited by me creative self-publishing. So this is sort of my viewpoint on self-publishing and how to maximize it, what it means for us all, and looking at the sort of 7 processes that are involved in publishing a book, and how do we take the most creative and the most personal approach to self-publishing. So I think it arises out of me seeing a lot of authors coming in who bring with them a lot of ideas about what publishing is, and a lot of myths and misunderstandings about self-publishing. I had them myself before I actually self-published myself. It's taken me a long time to really kind of catch hold of this whole very enormous, chaotic, hard to pin down, impossible to quantify industry, and say sort of what I definitively think. So it was important to me in writing this book that it would stand the test of time. So it isn't kind of, how to upload your book to KDP. It's not that kind of book. It's timeless principles and processes for publishing and for running an author business, and doing that in the most creative way possible. So yeah, I'm excited that it is out. We'll be talking about the different kinds of how-to fiction later on. So the different kinds of non-fiction, and it is very much in the how-to sort of end of non-fiction. And you?
Well, me. Well, yes, I have one. Here's one I prepared earlier.
Hi, it's out and it's brilliant. So I can say.
Thank you. Audio for Authors is out this Friday, the 6th of March. But it's so interesting because, of course, I uploaded the audiobook, which I self-narrated a number of weeks ago, and it's not there yet on anything, and there is apparently a backlog. So it's kind of annoying because we can't do pre-orders on audio, but I just remind people you can do pre-orders on print. So what I love with Ingram Spark, and of course I should mention Ingram Spark is the sponsor of this podcast on the Alliance of Independent Authors Network, and with Ingram, so I put up my pre-orders for the print book a couple of weeks ago, and for the hardback, large print, and the paperback. And that's been great. Even my mum pre-ordered, which is very cool because she doesn't normally do that. She buys it later, obviously, as mums do. But having
some mums,
having a pre-order for print is brilliant. And of course, we can do pre-orders for ebooks. So now I remember when we didn't have any of those things. We didn't get pre-orders for ebooks until 5 years ago or something. So I'm now, my next campaign is going to be getting pre-orders on audio so we can actually have a date when they go live, rather than this ridiculous upload them and wait and see. It might be 3 weeks, it might be 4 weeks, it might be 10 days. It just will appear at some point. So that was just my little comment. I am very grateful for the fact that we have pre-orders, but I still think that we've got further to go on that.
Yeah, we want all three formats to be equivalent on all matters. And I mean, we are getting there. We really are, considering that audio used to be considered a subsidiary right and now is very much, a core right for indies, and we can do that. So yeah, we will. I'm certain we will manage to make that happen Yeah, I think so. It's a matter.
I think so too. And, I also started writing. I'm kind of pointing in the wrong direction, but I can't even do it.
Go over your head.
Next dark fantasy book in my Matt Walker series, Map of the Impossible. So I'm about 30,000 words into that. It's quite hard getting back into it after the non-fiction, that switching heads. But I feel like I'm one of those writers. I know some people just embed in fiction all the time, but as we're going to talk about, if you're the type of person who likes to write non-fiction, likes to do the different creative projects, you have to learn to switch projects. So I'm back into that, and I feel like it took me about a week to get back up to speed with the series. I'd totally forgotten all this stuff, and now I'm like, okay, all right. I had one of those mornings this morning when I thought, oh, this isn't so bad. But it goes up and down every day. But good to be back to fiction, even though we're talking about non-fiction today.
Yeah. And that is the life of the indie. Very often the book you're talking about and the book you're writing are two completely different things. That's pretty much par for the course. Quick question before you leave your audiobook. Mary Claire wants to know, are you narrating this time?
Yes, absolutely. I am indeed. Audio for Authors, narrated by me. But it's funny because if you're used to my voice on the podcast, of course, audiobook narration, there's definitely more of a measured tone than the overly enthusiastic tone I often have in podcasting. So, but yes, indeed, I am narrating. Great. Okay, so let's get into the topic for today, which is taking your non-fiction books to the next level. So let's start, Orna, with what do we mean by non-fiction anyway when we're talking about it as a kind of author entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, as I kind of briefly alluded to earlier, nonfiction is one of the macro genres. So there are three: there's fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And within those kind of macro genre, lots of things happen. And especially in nonfiction, it breaks down into genres, subgenres, subgenre, and so on. But the big kind of divide in nonfiction really is between sort of um, narrative nonfiction, which aims to tell a story, take a creative sort of approach, and is very often focused on the author and the author's perceptions and views of life, or the author telling their own story in a memoir, for example. Where at the other end of it, we're talking about sort of self-help advice, how-to type of nonfiction, and the focus there is very much on the reader. Where the reader finds themselves, how we can help them, how we can provide value. They have a problem, how we can solve it, that kind of thing. So it's that different sort of direction in which your nonfiction lens is turned, I think, that very often decides the form that your book will take, because everything is different in those two. The voice, the shape of the words on the page, the sentences, how long it takes to write very often, all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that's, and then you've got obviously books that straddle both and do a bit of both. And I do think that nonfiction has the potential to be a lot more creative than it often is, so we do get a lot of very sort of step by step instructional sort of stuff, which is great, and it ticks the boxes and everything. But there is also, I think, plenty of room for the other kind of nonfiction, which is more creative, more leisurely, a more interesting read. And there's some amazing stuff at that end, I think, coming out all the time. And it would be great to see indies really moving into that territory and inhabiting it. I think we're really good on the how-to end, and very often up there at the very top in all the various niche and genre and subgenre, but not so much maybe on the narrative nonfiction end.
I think there is another subcategory which is kind of academic books.
Yes.
And that is an entirely different business. I say business model. It's a business model for the academic publisher, but not necessarily the people who write it. But yeah, I think I agree. I feel like, my books, like Audiobook and your self-published, or both of us have put elements of our personal story and kind of, just personal details and voice, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But for me, it's the difference between, and I use the wonderful indie Rachel Herron with 2 R's as an example, who wrote a wonderful memoir about knitting, which I have got. Now, I'm not into knitting at all, but I just thought this was a brilliant way of structuring a memoir, which was each essay is based around something she was knitting. And so it appealed to fans of the memoir genre, but also appealed to those who enjoy crafting and knitting and that type of thing. But that is a very different book to a how to knit a woolen jumper type book. So I think the big difference is the mindset of the writer, which is either I want to put together something about my life, or I want to teach somebody else something or help someone else solve a problem. And it's that solving a problem that makes the type of nonfiction I guess we're really talking about, is that we want to sell a number of them. And in that case, you are looking at keyword research around book titles, which is why my nonfiction books have very obvious subtitles, like how to write nonfiction. In fact, it's one of my books, how to market a book. I mean, there really is no, hiding what the book is about. But that is a good tip for writing nonfiction to market. If we're going to talk about writing to market, it fits with my expertise, but it also is written to a topic that people are buying books in. So what do you think about that? Because write to market is a very difficult topic for people to think about. But if you want to sell some nonfiction, it can be more easily done.
Without a doubt. And I think it doesn't have to be an either or. For me, it's very much about finding that kind of sweet spot between what you want to do, but also what is your value to the reader, and where do those two kind of come together. That will actually give you your micro niche usually, and it's well worth putting a lot of time into that. And so you need to begin with yourself, regardless of which one you're going to write. You need to look quite deeply into your own motives for writing this particular book. What is the goal, essentially? You know, are you writing this to help? And, you know, do you want to kind of give information? And if you do, you know, what sort of tone is it going to take? Do you want it to be inspirational in tone? Do you want it to be entertaining? You know, what are your goals? But then when you've decided that and you understand that, then getting really strategic about, as you say, things like the categories and the keywords, also the cover and the book description. And, you know, there are conventions. Once you've decided what kind of book it is, you need to start looking at the books that are around that book in the online stores and really pulling apart, you know, the ones that are selling. Why are they selling? What is the appeal? What are the keywords? You know, which category is it in? All that kind of stuff. So I don't think that doing that necessarily means you have to throw out your own sense of passion and mission and whatever it is that's kind of making you want to write this book. But you definitely can't just go off, if you want to actually sell the books, you can't just go off on that. You need to really think, you know, carefully about what value you're bringing.
And in fact, that brings up a really, probably the number one question that people ask around writing nonfiction, which is, do I have to be an expert in order to write this? And I feel the answer is yes and or no, depending on what you write. So, for example, it is very clear that Amazon and Google and people are cracking down on books like in the medical field and health field that have claims that are not backed up by evidence, and are favoring books in those fields written by people who actually know, who have qualifications. So it's very hard to tiptoe around this. And this is also happening in the finance niche. So this is money and health are two big areas. You know, Google with SEO, you know, a lot of people have seen their rankings drop because they're not official experts. So, and this is very difficult again, because one part of me says, absolutely, they should absolutely do this. This is really important. And the other part says, well, what if something's on the level, you know, on the cusp of someone's experience? So I would generally say, like, the topics I write about, you do not have to have an MFA to write a book on writing. I don't have any qualifications in writing whatsoever. I've just written a load of books.
Well, that is your qualification.
You know, and that is my qualification. That's
there are people writing books about how to write books who've never written a book. Well, presumably they wrote that book. Sorry?
Presumably they wrote that book about writing books. But no, I think the other type, the type that we're talking about, generally, you don't have to have a degree in something in order to write about something or be a speaker about something. Or, you know, most of us learn on the job. Even if it's an official job, you learn on the job. So there is a balance. Let's say it depends on the topic you write about.
I think that's true. And I think you need to look also at this whole concept of value, you know, the value that you bring. Because one of the things about self-publishing is, you know, in the old days, an idea would come into a nonfiction publisher and the publishing team would sit around and say, no, that's really a magazine article. There isn't enough in it for a book. Or they would say, no, that person hasn't got what it takes to have the confidence of the reader. You know, those kinds of judgments would be made about it. Now we get to kind of put the books out ourselves, and we don't always know enough about you know, where the book is located in the marketplace, what's around it in terms of competition, and what is its value to the reader. So some kind of very hard looking at ourselves and our value, I think, is necessary, because you can spend a lot of time writing a nonfiction book and it can absolutely go nowhere, you know. So you don't want that. And I will go so far as to say that everybody's an expert at something, but it can take a little bit of trial and error before you find out what your expertise actually is and what your value actually is. And thinking about that before you put the book out there is probably a better idea, before you put the book together. So I think one of the things about nonfiction, this type of nonfiction that we're talking about, the type that you and I write, one of the things about it is that you can do an awful lot more planning up front, generally speaking, than you do with fiction. I know there are exceptions to that, but I'm just generalizing because you have to. So it's worth doing that planning. It's worth doing the thinking. Very often we're just dying to sit down and write it, but it's worth doing a lot of thinking and a lot of research. If you were to pitch the book to a rights buyer and it was unwritten, you would have to give a very detailed proposal, and that proposal would have to include a comparison with other books and a justification as to why this book is necessary. So it has to be unique in some way. It has to stand out from all the others. It has to be bringing something that the books that are already up there at the top of the best sellers in that particular niche, what are you doing that's different? And the difference has to be significant enough for the reader to be tempted and say, oh yeah, gosh, I need to read that. So that's what you want them to be saying with a nonfiction book. With fiction book, it's kind of, oh, I'd love to read that. But with nonfiction, very often it's, I need to read that. So what's in your book that makes it a necessary read for the kinds of readers that you're trying to attract?
On that, we do have a question that is that relates. MG, I won't give out your whole name, but I've written a book about being bullied and what worked for me to move on. I was told I need public liability insurance in case someone sues me for the advice I gave that may not work for them. I presume you're in America, because in the UK we don't particularly worry about that kind of thing. But what do you think?
Well, I think it's a funny kind of insurance, but again, things may be different. Insurance and copyright and libel, all of these laws vary very much territory to territory. If you're telling your actual story, if you haven't been prescriptive in your advice, so if you haven't said, here's what you should do, here's what you should always do in every case, and that sort of prescriptive advice might run you into trouble. It might be something you just want to think about anyway, insurance aside. I am not aware of the value of public liability insurance in this regard. It's not something I've heard about. I definitely, though, have heard of people taking libel cases where they thought they were described as a bully. And that will be a much more common sort of scenario, and that you need to protect yourself against. So, I would go back into your story, look and see, were you prescriptive? Did you kind of tell people what they should do? If you did, just soften it a bit. Just say, this is my opinion. Here's what worked for me. Put your disclaimers in and you'll be fine. And I would forget about insurance.
Yeah, well, MG says I am actually in the UK. So in my latest book, Audio for Authors, I have a couple of chapters about copyright, about money, and I just put at the beginning of each chapter, I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. This is my own opinion based on experience. Please seek advice from a professional. Or in fact, in the Healthy Writer, we also put the same thing. Ewan, who is a medical doctor in the UK, said, I am a medical doctor, but I am not your doctor. Therefore, this is not advice for you. This is opinion based on experience. So I think those types of caveats are going to help. But I certainly we both know people who've written memoir, and which is not prescriptive, who've still had issues with people they might have portrayed in a negative light. So look, there's always risk. I mean, personally, I steer away from saying anything negative about anyone in writing or whatever, but you have to write what the book you're going to write. So yeah, pragmatic. But again, we can't offer you legal advice, but the Alliance has.
I was just going to make the disclaimer. Yeah. We have disclaimers all over the place as well on our nonfiction, because it's really important that people know that, and that they don't also take what you're saying as gospel truth, because everybody's situation is very different. But my feeling just about your particular situation, with the disclaimer that this is not legal advice, is that public liability insurance doesn't seem to me to be the right vehicle here to protect yourself anyway, even if you were trying to do that. So, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Let's move on, because we have lots to cover. We don't normally answer questions so much live, but there were some coming in that are kind of applicable. So let's talk about how many books. So there is a big question about, do you write the magnum opus, huge doorstop book with everything you know about a topic, like that's one option. Or do you write lots and lots of little books that split the topic down into different things? What do you think?
I think you split it down, is my sense. And there are a few reasons why I think that's the way to do it. First of all, I think, and again, I'm speaking generally, always this depends on your goal. But so if we spoke about academic books earlier, if you're in academia, there will be constraints on what you do and how you do it, and expectations around length that you will want to kind of meet. If you're establishing yourself as a sort of a thought leader, you may want to have this magnus opus at the top of the room that everybody is wildly impressed by. But generally speaking, for most of our members and for the average indie author, it makes a lot more sense to produce shorter books. That doesn't mean that it takes any less, or longer necessarily. It may take you roughly the same amount of time to write those, but the potential for commercial return is obviously higher if you can turn it into a series. But it has to be done in a way that actually works. So it would probably take a bit more planning, because you want to be putting out that first book when you know what's actually going on. And I'm speaking here about a book that would have been a great big fat book years ago, that you can now split down into smaller books. I'm not really talking about, say, the way you cover authorship, Joanna, where you have, a book on one particular aspect and then another one, then another one. They don't necessarily follow in any particular order, and people can pick up wherever they want to. But there are also books that you break down where you kind of need to start at book one, just like a fiction series, and read. It makes more sense, and you make most out of the book if you can actually read it in order. And that's sort of 5-book, 3-book, 7-book series where you break it down small. You can plan the arc exactly as it would have been in a big book, but your reader is likely to absorb the information and give you more attention for a short book, unless they're a particular kind of reader. There are some people who love long books, but they are the minority and not the majority of your readers. And then, of course, you can't charge 7 times the cost for a large book that you would for 7 small books. So commercially, it makes sense as well.
Yeah, again, I think it's what you're aiming at. I mean, like this audiobook, it's got audiobooks, audio for authors, audiobooks, podcasting, voice technologies. I really considered putting it out as 2 separate books, one on audiobooks and one on podcasting. And I decided to make it one just because I wanted a coherent offering in that space. And I'm not planning to do loads of books on audios. It really is like my collection of thoughts on the whole topic. And the voice technology thing was not big enough for its own book, so it felt right. But the other thing I'd say is
it also was, sorry, just to say, it also was what we were talking about earlier, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but your USP. There are lots of books on podcasting, and there are lots of books on audiobooks, but there isn't actually, to my knowledge, any other one that kind of surveys the whole world of voice, which is rising up in so many different ways. So
I hope so. I mean, hopefully it's different in some ways. But I would also say that I wrote a big book, Business for Authors, back in 2014, which I felt was exactly what everybody needed. And it included chapters on tax and strategic planning and business plans. And it's pretty comprehensive. And that it really hasn't sold many copies over the years. And what I was so confused. I was like, why aren't people buying this? And one, it was early, obviously, in the space. But the other thing was I decided to put a lot of the information that was most useful to most people into How to Make a Living with Your Writing, which is a much better title, because who wants to run a business when you can make a living with your writing? And How to Make a Living is my best nonfiction title by far. So what that is some of the same information, but much shorter. So it's about 27,000 words, How to Make a Living, and Business for Authors is 70. So that was taking similar information in a big book and turning it into a small book. And in fact, Tony Robbins did this. He wrote literally like this chunky doorstep book called Money, Master the Game, and it was brilliant. I loved it, but clearly it didn't sell enough books, because he came out with a short version like this called Unshakable about a year later, which was all the most useful bits in one shorter book. So definitely, even if you feel like I've done a big book, you can split it down into other things later and put a really good title on it.
Yeah, the title is so key with nonfiction. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk, because we said this would be a next level thing. I do want to skip on to that because I'm looking at time. So there are two next level things we want to talk about. The first one is craft. So how can you stand out with your craft? And the other one is business. What can you do to do next level businessy things with your nonfiction? So Orna, do you want to start with craft?
Yeah, so I mean, I spoke briefly about, and it's obviously very difficult to craft is the hardest thing in the world to kind of talk about because it's very much a doing thing. But I think the first thing you need to do if you're actually talking about trying to take your nonfiction to the next level creatively is that you step away from doing what you would normally do, however you would normally approach the topic. And one thing you can do is look at it from the opposite end and, you know, flip it over and think about how you would handle it differently. But it's also very much, I think, at the creative level, it is about developing your skills, the kinds of skills that make fiction work, makes this sort of nonfiction work as well. So we spoke briefly about story, and I think every nonfiction book will have some stories as examples and things. So I'm not really talking about that kind of short story that says everything, unless they're really inspired, you know, really pointed and interesting stories. I mean, you see that a lot in self-help books. You see ones that do very sort of mundane, ploddy stories, but then you see some, for example, some Zen Buddhist books that have stories in them that are completely mind-blowing and throw you out of, you know, your sort of everyday mind state into a different mind state through the power of story. So story is one thing. And I mean, everybody in marketing is talking about storytelling as a marketing tool. So I think when you're thinking about your nonfiction and you're thinking about the stories you're going to tell in the book, you're thinking about the stories you're also going to tell around the book in your content marketing generally. So story also in terms of, I think why we're good in nonfiction at putting in little short stories that are illustrative of the, I can't say it. Anyway, you know what I mean? That illustrate the point we're trying to make. We're good at doing that. You know, bringing it to the next level is often very much about looking at the entire story arc of the book and actually working on the emotional responses of the reader, second guessing them, being a bit detached from your material. So very often it's about having a first draft completely done to the level of satisfaction that you would perhaps normally put a book out at. And then you start to think about, okay, if I wanted to get really creative about this, if I wanted them to really feel pain in chapter 2 and, you know, feel consequent joy and in the last chapter and bring them through an emotional journey, how would I actually begin to craft that? And then you're into things like, exactly like fiction, things like pacing, like withholding certain information until later on in the book, and, you know, an arc of rising tension, a climactic sort of something that makes them feel they've had that whole deeper, more satisfactory reading experience. So yeah, I think that's just.
I also think, and again, it's coming back to voice, but I'm listening to audiobooks. So there's a book I just keep recommending. It's called Underland by Robert Macfarlane. It is a narrative nonfiction. It's called A Deep Time Journey is the subtitle. And his writing is incredible, and it's lyrical in a poetic way. And you can, in the audiobook, you can hear the language that I may not have noticed when I read, because I read so fast that I may skip over, in nonfiction, I may skip over beautiful language for meaning. Whereas with audio, I'm actually listening. I've listened to this audiobook 3 times already, and I just love, because I'm learning about language in listening to it. And when I narrated how to write nonfiction, because my understanding has moved on quite a lot, my last edit, the audio for Author's Book, I actually was editing for voice, which involves listening for sounds, repeated sounds, and so I'm living with a thesaurus much more now. And with Map of the Impossible, I'm using a thesaurus every second line because I know that I will want to change that word later. So I'm really finding that and I'm sure this will deepen my craft in both nonfiction and fiction, because that poetic language is often Quality is very difficult, but that is often a deepening of the craft. It's, you know what I mean?
I definitely do, absolutely. And I think also in terms of doing that kind of conscious improvement of one's own craft through essentially what we're doing there is we're being apprentices in, at the foot of the master kind of thing, and learning how to do it by seeing how somebody else does it in a way that we think is completely amazing. When you're doing that, it's really, Joanna talks about hearing it much more in the audiobook. For me, it's the absolute opposite. If it's the audiobook, my mind goes off wool gathering after a while. I don't concentrate at the same level. It's got to be the text. So know yourself in terms of which way is the best for your learning in that regard. It's also very useful. You mentioned reading it 3 times. I think it's a really useful thing to read a book like that twice at least. You read it first just for the joy of it as a reader, and then you go right back to the beginning and you start to rip it apart as a writer, looking at how did he or she get the effects that they managed to get. That bit where I was really kind of blown away. What did they do? At what point did they prepare for that moment? Was it just before it happened, or was the ground actually laid much further back in the book? Looking at the word choices, looking at the sentence structures, looking at the paragraphs, looking at the chapter lengths, all of these things are part of the craft and the effect that you're trying to have. So it's great to do this. I haven't done it for ages. I'm actually
I think it's rare.
My own appetite here. Yeah.
Well, it's rare to find a book, especially as our own craft develops. It's rare to find a book that we go, whoa, that is stand out. But Underland has won like all the prizes as well. It's won so many prizes. What I just want one more thing to add on that is detail. So, it's a fiction thing. You don't say Orna picked the flower. You have to specify what flower is. And that's one of the things in his book. It's a lot about rock and nature and stuff. And he knows all the words for all the things, but it's also able to evoke color and sensory detail. All the things that we're told to do in fiction, he is doing it in nonfiction. So, definitely details, specific details are really important. But let's move on to the business, the next level.
Just before we leave, I do have, and this is one of my typical recommendations where I don't remember the full name, but it will go into the show notes, a really good book about how to approach this. It's a very long book and it's a slow book, but it's called Ensouling Nonfiction, and he's very much about taking the reins off and letting yourself go on that kind of writing into the dark thing that you tend to do more often with fiction or poetry, but also about how to get into the create state when you're actually thinking about the subject that you're writing about, and in a sense honouring the subject through nonfiction in the same way. So he's quite polemical in that he feels strongly that not so much nonfiction is just too dead and too boring.
I would agree at this point.
Yeah. Why have we left it, be so boring? Why don't we actually do more about it? So his name is Stephen something, and I will put it in the show notes.
Okay, brilliant. So the next level is also the commercial side. So nonfiction suits itself to so many more streams of income than fiction. So, for example, the How to Write Nonfiction book over there, that is in ebook, paperback, hardback, large print, workbook edition, which is just some of the questions or all the questions with lines available. And also I have a multimedia course, an evergreen online course, which is videos. And then I have also spoken on that topic as a paid speaker. So I've turned that material into lots and lots of different things. I've also put chapters out as podcast interviews, not interviews, as podcast episodes. And generally just turned that into lots of streams of income. Orna, what about your experience with nonfiction?
It's similar. So, sometimes it's going in one way, blogs get turned into books and then it divides back down the other way, but lots of different ways of putting it out. And also I think of drawing in community around the topic. I think nonfiction lends itself. I mean, fiction fans are also something, but it's something else. nonfiction where people gather in because the information is there, or because they just want to go deeper into the topic than maybe a book allows, or receive the information in different sorts of ways. So, membership organizations, Patreon, there are all sorts of different ways.
Yes,
So, to take it and develop it. And I think if you don't, it's kind of a waste, not just from your own commercial earning point of view, because books, of course, are very low value, and can be put out in different ways that make them much more premium. So from the commercial perspective, but also I think you reach different readers with different formats for the words. And I think, one of the things that self-publishing is great about, and has facilitated in a great way, and I think we're seeing more and more and more, we talk about it in the 10 business models that we've outlined that authors can use to earn a living. Just that ability to turn the same stuff into lots of different things so that you can get a decent income from it. And we're seeing that more and more. And the idea that, in the old days, if you didn't sell enough books, you had to get a job that would supplement you. Now what you try to do, and some indies are doing super successfully, is you take the very same stuff that you're putting into books, but you market them and shape them up in all sorts of different ways. So it all becomes part of your body of work. So yes, you might most relish putting together long form fiction or nonfiction, but putting together teaching materials or whatever it might be that actually has a bigger return for you. And I would say, observing a lot of indie authors now, it's when somebody gets that premium product, whatever it is, on top of the books that their business tends to take off to the degree that they can actually go full time. So it's really worth thinking about that. And it's more than repurposing. It is repurposing content, but it's more than that.
Yeah, definitely. I have three more things I just remembered. One, affiliate income. So I have a free nonfiction book. My Successful Self-Publishing is free as an ebook on all platforms. So it's useful, but it's also stuffed full of tutorials, like, for example, a vellum tutorial, which means if people go and choose to use my link, of course, they don't have to. We're all about ethical affiliate income. There's also, I use my ethical link to the Alliance of Independent Authors in there. So this is a free ebook that brings in income through affiliate revenue. Secondly, a download page. So if you're going to do a nonfiction book, you can say, get the extras on my download page, and then invite people to sign up for your email list, because so often if you sell through the mainstream platforms, you don't get people on your email list. So that's a really good thing. And third, Joseph Alexander just popped in to the chat. And of course, he's famous for guitar books, which are a brilliant example of could be a series, but each one is standalone. And one of the things Joseph's doing that I've also done is translations. So nonfiction into translation is much easier than fiction, because even though we have talked about craft, certainly Joseph's books, they're very crafty, but they are essentially some words around music. So it's much cheaper to get some of those nonfiction books translated. And in fact, today I've actually uploaded the German version of Mindset, which went through AI translation and then an editor and has now been narrated. So, and I obviously couldn't have done that. And I don't want to do it for fiction in that way, because fiction is the more arty art form as such. So that's three more things you can do. And have you thought of any more, Orna?
We have a list of 10, and it's late in the evening now and I can't remember one of them. But there are essentially, as far as we can see, and there will be more, I think, evolving over the years, but as far as we can see, there are 10 models that are being currently used right now by indie authors to make a full-on living from their writing. And if you Google 10 income, 10
we'll
business
put a link in the show notes.
We will put a link in the show notes. But yeah, it's 10 business models for authors, essentially, and they're all there. Judy has a question around affiliate marketing. Struggle to make my Amazon affiliate codes work and don't really understand the overall tactics. Have you time to give her a quick 1, 2, 3 on it?
The quick answer is you need traffic for affiliate income, and then you need to have something useful that someone in the niche that the reader really wants. So obviously in a book about successful self-publishing, you're going to need editors, cover designers, formatting software, all the things that suit things like tutorials. So you link to those tutorials in the book, and that helps. Lena says, I wish people are interested in ancient Egypt, but ancient authors might not be, but lots of other people are interested in ancient Egypt. So off the top of my head, like, I don't know about that niche, but if there are things like guide to translating hieroglyphics, or, you know, even things like with Books and Travel, which is my new site, well, it's a year old now, but I've thought about doing affiliate stuff with travel companies, with gear, you know, backpacks, with all of that type of thing with it, which don't relate to the author niche at all. So you actually have to get very creative. You know, we're all very creative around what you think of with affiliate marketing. So if your fiction contains dog stuff, you know, dogs, you could have an affiliate code to your favorite pet food. There are so many ideas with affiliate marketing, but think about it as things ethically, things that you use and can personally recommend, that you are telling people about who also would find those things useful, and you also say that you get a percentage of the sale. So you have to keep all of that above board. So yeah, very important to keep it all above board. Any thoughts on that, Orna?
Traffic. You know, I see people saying my affiliate page doesn't work, but when you look at the actual Google Analytics, there's nobody on the page. If the right people are there, then you don't need to do any fancy footwork, Julie, to make them click through. If you've done the job of getting the right people onto the page who want what you're offering, just the text link, you know, saying that it exists is usually enough, but you do need quite a few people. And so, yeah, so you need to be kind of working in that niche. So I would have thought that your Julie, your nonfiction would work quite well with this. Not that Amazon affiliate really is not, but other people who are offering, you know, perhaps more substantial affiliate and more unusual things than kind of more books tends to go better. So
yeah. There we go. Okay, so we are out of time. It seems like that resonated with people. So really glad you guys turned up live, and also hope that was useful for anyone who listens later. But Orna, just a quick one. What's happening this month? Where can people go to find the conference?
Yes, so we are on one of the longest website addresses in the world, selfpublishingadviceconference.com, selfpubcon for short. And yeah, we'll be there, the usual format, 24 sessions, 24 hours. And lots of really great people and panels. And as I said, if we don't manage to do the panels live from the London Book Fair, we hope that we'll bring you those people who would have spoken at London, that we'll be able to do it virtually and bring it to you. And we'll have lots of competitions and yeah, one-to-one with our sponsors and our speakers, and our thanks to the sponsors who make it all happen. Our gold sponsor is Ingram Spark again, and Publish and Dragon, naturally speaking, are our silver sponsors. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I always love it because I always learn a huge amount. And our topic actually is quite linked to this show, is author income this time. So we've got 24 sessions on making a living. We won't say the business word, how to make a living with your writing, or how to increase your author income, multiple streams of income, how to think around all of that. So there'll be sessions on pretty much everything we've discussed here.
Okay, so next month we are going to talk about tools and useful software for authors. Because it's quite funny because we just mentioned that, but this I've been doing some keyword research this month, and this seems to be one of the most popular topics that people search for. So we thought we would go through, you know, our writing software, publishing software, but also business software, things like accounting and management of all the things we do. And between us, there will be quite a lot. And so I thought that would be quite an interesting topic. So we will be doing that at the beginning of April. So yeah.
Yep, that's great. And Val has a question, where will we find the show notes? The show notes are issued with the podcast, not with this live session. So Friday week on the Self-Publishing Advice blog, every Friday essentially. So if you go to selfpublishingadvice.org, you will find the sign up for the podcast sign up page, and you can get your alerts to sign up to your favorite podcast listening, whatever. And you'll find the show notes there each Friday. So
yeah, fantastic. Yeah, this goes out on video first and then audio later. So you get double whammy of fun. Okay, all right. Well, I guess happy writing, happy publishing.
Happy author business.
Yes. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next month. Bye bye now.